Peter Beinart is the editor-at-large of Jewish Currents. And then there's MSNBC contributor Michael Cohen, who, I don't know, does he still write at the Globe? I guess maybe not. I'm not sure.
But everyone should be reading Jewish Currents right now. They do great work. Noah Colwin writes over there. Alex Kane, who I had on last week to talk about dissent of pro-Palestinian voices on campuses. And of course, Peter Beinart here doing really great work.
Beinart has been a really important voice on this question, really over the past, I guess, maybe 10, 15 years, when he, reevaluated his ideas in terms of like the Iraq War and this and that, and has been really excellent, really, for over a decade.
He was a leader as a student, wasn't he? Like a Zionist sort of student leader.
Yeah. I mean, he is. To the extent that like an apostate, I guess, has a lot of credibility in certain spaces. This guy has it, and here he is. And look, it is quite clear that Hamas is a threat to Israel in some fashion or another. And the real question is how do you deal with this threat long term? How do you create a situation where you can provide, and I'm not sure that Michael Cohen actually really contemplates this as a primary objective or goal. But if your primary objective goal is not, if one of them is not to emancipate Palestinians, then a lot of things follow logically because you have made that first basic assumption. And we are now in year 75 of Israel's existence as a chartered state, recognized by the UN. And if the goal was at that time, and remains so, to give a place of security for Jews, because obviously the Holocaust, but even prior to that, there was a few places where Jews could live safely. If that was the goal, and remains the goal, then clearly what the country of Israel has been doing has not worked. And that is specifically to deny freedom for Palestinian people. And you can go back 30 years and argue whether Arafat was aggressive enough in accepting the peace proposal from the Israelis. But you can also go back to 1948, in the months before Israel was established, and see that there were pogroms perpetrated by then Zionist militia, and in some instances, Zionist terrorist organizations like Irgun, that massacred tens, if not hundreds, of Palestinians and dispossessed tens of thousands.
Yeah.
And I suppose then you could go back and say, but the Romans or the Greeks sacked, Jerusalem 2,000, 4,000 years ago. But the bottom line is, if the agenda in modernity is to keep Jews safe, it's not working in this way. And so the assumption is, how do you deal with the threat of Hamas? Or how do you deal with the threat that naturally comes when you dispossess and oppress millions of people? With that, let's listen to this exchange.
I think it's important to be clear what's happening in Gaza. I mean, what's happening here is obviously a tragedy, and we are seeing people needlessly dying, including children and primarily civilians. But that's a decision in large extent that Hamas has made in order to use people as human shields to prevent Israel from attacking them. I mean, we're seeing right now this fight happening around the Al-Shifa hospital. Why is that happening? Because Hamas uses hospitals as command centers, military command centers. So I think we have to be clear that, we can blame Israel for this, but Hamas deserves a great deal of responsibility for the carnage that's being unleashed in Gaza. But in general, I think that sort of the problem I have a little bit with Peter's argument is that, no one would have said after 9/11 we shouldn't attack the terrorists who are responsible for 9/11.
Pause it for
right
1
now,
second.
there is
I just want to make something clear because I was alive then. There was a lot of people, not everyone, not the majority of people, but there was a lot of people who were saying, and I think one of them actually ended up being a Democratic presidential candidate in 2004, who were saying that this should have been a police action. Instead of invading two countries and occupying them for well over a decade, in both instances, we could have gone in and found the perpetrators of 9/11. That's what we could have done, but we didn't.
We didn't.
So there were people saying something very different.
And I should say that precise kind of police action or special forces action would have been even more appropriate in this instance if, again, your only concern is that of Israelis, because a police action would allow for there to be like more direct access to the hostages that have been taken by Hamas, as opposed to carpet bombing a region and ensuring that hostages will die under rubble at the very least.
And engendering more terrorism. And also,
Well, here, let's let him answer those other second order implications.
Threat from Hamas in Gaza. We saw that threat. And the idea that insurgency could be worse than what we saw on October 7th seems a bit hard to imagine. I think right now, the focus needs to be on the urgent threat that is coming from Hamas, a threat that we saw on October 7th and that we still see today. We are still seeing rockets fired into Israel. We are still listening to Hamas leaders talk about how this changes nothing from their perspective. They still intend to use Hamas as a launching pad for attacks.
It's interesting.
Let me let Peter in because we don't have a ton of time, so I want to let Peter
when Israel went into southern Lebanon to depose the PLO when they were launching rockets against Israel in the early 1980s, it couldn't imagine anything worse. It got Hezbollah. When the United States went in to depose Saddam Hussein, we couldn't imagine anything worse. We got ISIS. Unless you have a political strategy to deal with the fundamental underlying grievances of the Palestinian people, which are a lack of freedom, you are not creating deterrence in the long run. You're entering a quagmire that is going to leave Israel more wounded and more unsafe than it is today.
Well, you're definitely not going to create deterrence if you don't respond to the death of 1,500 or 1,200 of your civilians. I mean, that is...
There's a different way of responding than this. You can respond in a targeted military way, the way we should have done after 9/11, not by deposing a government and entering a quagmire.
I wish we had more time. I really appreciate this conversation.
Yep.
Also,
very well said. That's very well said. And the problem is that there's not in Cohen's argument here. There is zero. Never mind. If people don't have any type of moral obligation towards the freedom of Palestinians, that's I find it reprehensible. But that's their problem. But if you agree on the idea that like everyone there, including the Israelis, should feel secure, there is simply no evidence in history that without killing another million people in that region, innocent civilians, that you're going to be able to provide that security for the Israelis. Like even on his own terms, put aside the morality issue.
Yeah.
There is to do this and to have no sort of like notion, none of it's contingent on any type of political solution. None of it takes into mind a political solution which involves freedom for Palestinians. There is no solving this in that way. They can continue to try and mow the lawn, but it can go another 75 years, and I don't think it frankly will, because I think Israel will be completely isolated far before that. And you'll still be, this is not safe.
Yeah, I mean, again, putting aside just the fact that the liberation of the Palestinian people isn't really even taken into consideration here. Even the kind of threadbare political solutions that are provided don't take into account the Palestinian sovereignty and their ability to determine their own democracy and have political rights. Like the idea that what's being floated to Netanyahu by the United States government is that the Palestinian Authority will take over Gaza in the aftermath of these mass killings. And there's no consideration there to what the Palestinians want. That's also not a viable solution either. But even that undemocratic notion, even that idea is being rejected by Netanyahu. So which begs the question, well then, when even regime change, essentially, and the imposition of the Palestinian Authority, which is deeply unpopular among many segments of the Palestinian population, even when that is imposed on people, that imposition is rejected by the Netanyahu government. What is the solution here? What is the solution except complete expulsion of all Palestinians from Gaza or murder?
Yeah.
And that is literally the question that we're dealing with here.
It's not about anti-terrorism. It's about what Baruch Himmerlin, who was a sociology professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, called politicide. This is about, they literally just did a controlled demolition of the Palestinian Legislative Council, which is Gaza's de facto parliament. You don't do that if you're fighting terrorism or looking for a political solution. You're trying to end their politics entirely, including and also them as a people.
And it's amazing to me to see ostensibly liberal people take on arguments that have been mostly reserved for the right on this very topic, which is we talk about this on this show a lot, the look what you made me do argument. Look what you made us do to Gaza. Look what you made us do, Hamas, by using human shields. Look what you made us do by leveling refugee camps, by bombing maternity wards and hospitals and then invading them and shooting people. Look what you made us do. Yeah. You shouldn't have done the
rocket out of the concentration camp we're keeping you in. So
yeah,
you got to kill a bunch of your civilians.
And I'm sorry if that is like your knee-jerk reaction. You have to ask yourself what your belief is in and what your blind spots are when it comes to Arabs and Muslim people and who you've decided can be humanized in your eyes from a Western perspective and who isn't. So.
Good for Beinart and also Joy Reid, who I think has been doing some
Joy Reid's been doing great
that.
work on this. Good for her. And yeah, I mean, there's the many of the MSNBC hosts have stepped up here in a way that is good to see.
Let's play this footage of the hostage families in Israel who are marching from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem to essentially promote. Yeah, it's like a 16-hour walk. Wow, I think. Yeah. I think. To address Netanyahu, to basically pressure him to actually attempt to get the hostages back. There is supposedly a deal that is being negotiated with through Qatar for at least the 100 or so women and children held by Hamas in exchange for 100 of the women and children held by Israel who are uncharged in Israeli prisons. In other words, being held hostage by Israel. And they're having to march because the Israeli government, particularly Benjamin Netanyahu, and probably others, but he has a real strong personal incentive. They want to be able to justify this incursion in any way they can. And the existence of the hostages helps them justify this in some fashion. And the release of the hostages will shorten the window in which there's justification, at least in their mind, will function. You're already seeing U.S. popular support begin to turn. Certainly, world support has turned. And that's why you have to have all of these family members of the hostages actually march on their own government to attempt to secure their release. I mean, think of how bizarre that is.
Insane.
And contrast it with the pro-war rally that we saw yesterday in Washington, D.C.
That use them as the same object Bibi's using them for.
Exactly. Never mind what they actually want, which is I can't even fathom the grief and pain that people are going through seeing their own government bomb the hell out of the place where their family members are held hostage and then claim publicly that that's what they're
Right.
doing that to save them.
Right. Those posters that people are hanging up in the States should probably also have like the email for Bibi Netanyahu to ask him to see if he can do something to get him returned. Here's pictures from that march. Apparently, John Hagee couldn't make it there. They didn't. I don't know how many anti-Semites they had to speak to that rally. Probably none.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just gives you a sense of how blinkered the stuff is here, and which is not to say that 80% of the Israeli population it seems wants to go into level Gaza as it is, but. I mean, they're not afraid to support the return of the hostages because they want them back, as opposed to wanting to use them as leverage to level Gaza.
I mean, I just remember what Blinken tweeted out on October 8th. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan and I spoke further on Hamas' terrorist attack on Israel. I encouraged Turkey's advocacy for a ceasefire and the release of hostages held by Hamas immediately. So immediately we knew that actually the way to secure the release of hostages is to probably do hostage swaps. But instead we decided to bomb civilians.
Yep.